Well, welcome to today's edition of the Purple Inspiration Podcast, where we have conversations with community-minded leaders who are solving real problems. Today, I've got to start out with just a little tribute, a little off topic, but I got to give a little tribute to Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris passed away today. I had the chance to work with him in 1990 in Washington, D.C., and we actually did a movie premiere that Senator Bob Dole had co-sponsored with Senator Pete Wilson, who became governor of California. And the movie premiere was Delta Force 2, The Colombian Connection. Just wishing Chuck Norris, his family, rest in peace, friend. You were a great American, and we pray for your family. Today, my guest is Supervisor Candace Andersen. She is, in my mind, the most popular woman in elected office in Contra Costa County and probably the entire Bay Area. She has served on the board of the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors for 14 years, representing District 2. She's run unopposed the last 2 cycles, which is a testament to the great job that she's doing on behalf of her constituents. She served as our mayor here in Danville and served on the Morgan Hill City Council, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Candace is a licensed attorney in both California and Hawaii and grew up in Hawaii, which is far different than the snows of upstate New York that I grew up in. She has a BA and a JD from Brigham Young University and attended Punahou School in Honolulu the same time as Barack Obama, which I think is a fascinating story in itself. So Candace, welcome today. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thank you so much, Judy. Delighted to be here with you.
So you, in my mind, when I first met you, you told me stories about that I thought were fascinating about your background in public office. In fact, I don't know anybody else who was appointed to office in 2 cities. You were appointed in Morgan Hill and then in Danville, and then stood for election in Danville, where you became council member and served 2 terms as mayor. Now you're a county supervisor. Just tell us a little bit about those instances and what motivates you to be such a strong voice in public service, particularly for women.
Well, thank you, Judy. And I often tell people it's much easier to get appointed to an elected office than elected in. You just have to convince, in my case, 4 council members that you're the right choice. And Morgan Hill was an interesting situation where my first step was really getting involved in a commission. I have 6 children. My 4th child had been born, and I was at the point practicing law part-time, but decided I needed to take a step back. But thought I have a degree in public policy. I'm an attorney. I would love to give back to my community. I found myself on 2 commissions in Morgan Hill, the Parks Commission and the Rent Stabilization Commission, which is essentially rent control for a mobile home park. And then a council member was leaving. And for whatever reason, I really listened to that inner voice that said, you're supposed to be up there on the diets. And I thought, no. I have 4 children, ages 2, 4, 6, and 8 at the time. How will I ever juggle all of that? But I really felt it was the right thing to do. So I did my homework. I understood what the issues were before the city. I reached out to council members, and most of them wanted to meet with me ahead of time behind the scenes. And again, it wasn't a Brown Act violation. It was just, hey, here's who I am. Many of them already knew me because they had appointed me to these 2 commissions. And then I was the least objectionable candidate. And I got appointed, and I absolutely loved what happened. And I was served for 2 years. And right when it was time for me to run for my seat in Morgan Hill, which I had every intention of doing, my husband got a job offer in Walnut Creek. He had grown up in Danville and Alamo, and it seemed balancing mom's political career versus a really amazing place with outstanding schools to raise our family, and in the same community where my husband had grown up. So we moved to Danville. So when I got to Danville, and I always tell people, you don't have to be the mayor, you don't have to be a council member to make a difference in your community. I immediately got involved. And when I say immediately, I mean immediately. I was trying to get my then 9-year-old and 8-year-old into Cub Scout day camp, which in the San Ramon Valley was a big deal.
Yep.
And we had just moved into our house, and I signed them up for scouting. And I said, okay, when is scout camp? And he said, oh, it's too late. It's filled. And so I said, well, who's the camp director? Let me call and find out. And I called the camp director. And at the time, I'd had my 5th child, so I had a 4-month-old baby. And she said, well, we are completely full, but the person running the TAD program, which is the daycare for the whole camp, has just had to walk away because of family emergency. If you will come to camp every day and run daycare for approximately 50 children, the children of all of the other camp volunteers, I will let your 2 little boys go to camp. And so that's what I did. I took my 3 children who were ages 6, 4, and the newborn and ran their TAG program, but then just got involved in the schools, scouting, all of those great things, ledge councils. And then 2003, I'd had my 6th child. My youngest was entering kindergarten, Sam, who was a friend of Judy's son, Michael. And my oldest, PJ, was heading off to college, and vacancy on the Danville Town Council. Worked in San Ramon, tried in Danville, and the sitting council member, Millie Greenberg, had been appointed by Governor Gray Davis to the County Board of Supervisors, to the seat I currently hold. And once again, it wasn't just throwing an application, but it was doing my homework. It was reading through Danville's general plan. I went to the library and checked out the general plan. I don't know how many people even touched the general plan in the Danville library, but I did. And I really tailored my application to the issues that I knew were happening in Danville. And once again, great pool of candidates, great others who could have done an amazing job. Least objectionable candidate, I got appointed, and then I ran in 04, I ran in 08, and had the opportunity to serve twice as mayor before running for county supervisor in 2012. So I say absolutely, when there's a vacancy, apply, but do your homework first, get to know who the council members are, and don't hesitate to have other people make phone calls for you, or people who know the council, just to vouch for your credibility, that you're not some crazy person who's going to be disruptive, but in fact, someone who can make a difference in the community.
Well, I mean, Danville, I just got to put in a plug for Danville, California, one of the greatest communities on earth. Safest community, which is something that everyone's very proud of. As many people know, I served as the chamber president here. And the interesting thing about Danville, I was taking my relatives around just this week to a bunch of different restaurants, and everywhere I went, I saw people I knew, and they said to me, "Why aren't you the mayor of Danville?" And I started laughing, and I said, I love being chamber president, but I really do, like you said, I love the idea of being appointed to office. I love people who run for election as well, but being appointed is a great way to start in public service, and something that I have really appreciated. So let's move to some more serious subjects here. Contra Costa County, as we know, you currently have a sales tax, correct me if I'm wrong, 8.75%. And even in some cities, it's higher, like in Concord, places like that. Recently, the board voted to place a 5-year 0.065% general retail sales tax and use measure on the June 2nd ballot, which is expected to generate an additional $150 million in revenue if it passes. Now, you were the dissenting vote on that, and I'm really grateful that you did that, putting working families first. Tell us a little bit about this measure. What should people know about this measure in Contra Costa?
Well, it is important to know that Contra Costa is being hit hard right now by HR 1, the big beautiful bill in Congress. And we are, in fact, seeing significant cuts in the funding that goes toward our health care, through our health insurance and the reimbursement rates. We're seeing cutbacks in CalFresh, and we're going to see people, because of eligibility requirements, losing some of their health insurance through Medi-Cal. And so it's a serious concern. And so when we first started looking at the sales tax, I recognized we are going to be in big trouble. We are going to be facing anywhere from about $310 to about $320 million just off the top of a deficit within the next year. Actually, next year is when it's really going to hit. And so that was really a grave concern of mine. And through the discussions, through other things, that amount got a little inflated. And rather than seeing a cumulative amount of about 310 million, there was a perception that it was an annual hit of over 300 million a year, which is a much more serious predicament. When it came to vote on the tax, we had friends in the community, Cocoa Tax, saying, this isn't annual 300 million, it's a cumulative. And as I did additional research, I said, we are really looking at cumulative. And then we had some more information. And so cumulatively, if you throw on some other factors, we are looking at about a $500 million deficit in our healthcare system over the life of the tax. And that's a huge amount. What I really wanted my board to do is to slow the process down. It would mean, because of timing, we couldn't get it on the June ballot. But what I wanted to bring back to voters is a more precise number, one that would be scaled back, that would be directly related to our hit because of HR1, as opposed to HR1 plus 3% increase because of cost of living adjustments, because of other additional matters. And so for me, it came down, not that we don't need an increase, I just didn't feel that we needed quite that increase, because we are estimating 125 to 150 million dollars a year in sales tax, which then would more than cover what we needed. And I wasn't willing to ask the voters to go out for that. And so that's why I was now asked everyone, slow down, let's take a better look at how we're proposing this. And then the other complex factor, of course, is that we also would be taking some cities over what they're allowed to be taxing. And so we do need some legislative intervention to do that. And right now, Senator Jesse Arreguin is working on that to try to come up with he's already working on one for, I believe it was the city of Hercules, that was going forward. So we're looking at, how that comes about too, because that would need to ostensibly be passed prior to the election in June, and it would need to be signed by the governor as well. And so we'll see where that all goes. It's one of those interesting things where there is a need. It was being set up in a way only for 5 years to get us through this crunch period, but I just felt we could have done better.
Well, you've always been meticulous about the facts, as we know from your study talking about appointed office, which is something we really appreciate, because a lot of people go out and just say, oh, this is the party line. This is what they say on the right. This is what they say on the left. This is what we're doing. And you've always been your own person, which is something that everybody appreciates.
I do. I am. I know. And it's got, for me as a taxpayer, I'm really very fiscally responsible when it comes to taxpayer dollars. And the reality about a sales tax is it's really a regressive tax. Right. It impacts the poorest of the poor, those who are most vulnerable, in a way that's very different than those who are wealthier and can afford this additional tax. So we'll see how it all goes. Again, I'm not actively campaigning against it. There is a need. I just think we could have done better.
Well, appreciate that. On the heels of that, we're looking at a 0.5-cent sales tax increase to fund transit that's scheduled for November. And this tax impacts 5 counties and is largely to fund BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, and other transit agencies who also cannot meet their operational funding obligations. Now, I completely understand what happened with HR1 and the counties, but this is a whole different thing. And we've seen BART, particularly seems to just move through their funding very, very quickly. On the one hand, we know East Bay traffic for commuters is miserable to San Francisco and to San Jose, even beyond our rush hour. I was just in it the other day as I was taking my cousins around. So on the one hand, we need BART, and there are many workers in our region who rely on it every day. But on the other hand, BART seems unable to manage its own agency effectively, even relying on a state loan from Governor Newsom, who came in a couple weeks ago to front current operations. So what's your feeling on the transit measure? It's very complicated, I think, because
it's a complicated measure.
Going to the voters in June with the county tax, and then November with this tax.
Yeah, and this one was in the works long before the county sales tax.
Yes.
County sales tax came up sort of at the last minute, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, on which I sit, was working for a while on what are we going to do to help our transit system be more functional. And I'm going to articulate clearly anything I'm saying on this is my opinion. It doesn't reflect anything on the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And similarly, it's important to know that there is a public transit revenue measure district, which I also sit on, which is the body that has authorized putting this before voters, assuming signatures are gathered. And so this public transit revenue measure district is made up of Alameda County, Contra Costa County, San Mateo, Santa Clara, and then City and County of San Francisco. And so this is a special district made up primarily of, and the board is Metropolitan Transportation Commissioners. And we, working again with our state legislature, saw SB 63 that passed, which then did authorize this being placed on the November ballot if enough signatures are gathered. So it's not a slam dunk that it's on there. Signatures must be gathered because this is a citizen initiative. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at potentially a 0.5-cent sales tax. Alameda, Contra Costa, Santa Clara, San Mateo. San Francisco would be looking at a 1-cent sales tax because they have more transit agencies within the city that have been also significantly impacted. So I think what's helpful, I think you pointed out a really good point of BART is really an integral part of our transportation system. When BART goes down, when BART workers were on strike several years ago, just on those mornings when through mechanical failures, it stops, the traffic is a nightmare. And so absolutely, we keep BART running. And how does that happen? I think to your point, there is accountability with BART. They need to be demonstrating to the public, to the community, that they are making cutbacks and how they're doing things. And it's one thing to say, well, if it doesn't pass, we're just going to close all of these stations. But they've got to show operationally how they are, taking this in a way where they are reducing their costs and not just depending upon a bailout. I will say pre-pandemic, though, in BART's defense, I was always amazed that pre-pandemic, they had what we call fare box recovery. Their fare box recovery was about 64 to 70% of their operating expenses. And that's huge. Amtrak doesn't do that. Our local agencies don't do that. By comparison, most of us, maybe our fare box recovery is 20 to 30% of our budgets. And so they were doing really, really well in the scheme of things. I mean, they had other issues. Safety was one. Yeah. We had concerns about rates, which they now have corrected. They've done a lot for safety with ambassadors. But so they were doing pretty well. Currently, they're back in the range of the rest of our transit agencies, where they're getting about 25 to 30% of their operating costs covered by fare box. And as I've sat down with BART directors, as I've met with their executive director, one of the issues is simply that people still are working from home, and they may be going into the office instead of going back every day. They might be going back 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And so when they look at Clipper cards, which are the transit cards used to enter and ride on BART, they're finding they've got a lot of the same users back, but the frequency is not the same. And so that has been one of their biggest challenges. And so while we wanted to say, oh, they've just got to cut all their, inefficiencies, they've got to go back and slash salaries or whatever, it's not that simple. It's really a complex thing because ridership demand has changed. Now, what they are finding is with special events, with sporting events, they are able to increase ridership tremendously. And so they are doing, what I've been impressed with what they're doing is, one, as I mentioned, the fare gates. They are seeing far more revenue coming in than before. because people are not cheating the system. They're not jumping the gates. They're not bursting through. So I really applaud them for that. They also have new safety systems on the trains with both ambassadors and with ways that we can use apps to notify them if something is uncomfortable. So I see them making some very positive changes. So to me, it's not so far-fetched a proposal, but can they do more? Absolutely. And I hope they will do more so that it's a partnership with taxpayers where it's not just, hey, we want to bail out from you taxpayers. It's saying, here's how we're also cutting costs, how we're becoming more efficient. And it's not just by shutting down your train station.
Right, right. Well, I think it's going to be first off, it'll be interesting to see if they get the signatures, which I would imagine they probably will. And then, yeah, I'm interested in seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I understood this. If other jurisdictions pass it and Contra Costa doesn't, we still have to pay it, right?
Well, as long as it has 50% plus one over the whole district voting on it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of like in Contra Costa County, if we have the countywide tax, if one city's residents don't vote in a majority vote for it, you're still stuck with it.
One more question, and I know this is near and dear to your heart. You are very involved in your church. You've got beautiful husband, beautiful family, 6 children, 13 and 1 on the way. Am I correct?
15 grandchildren, 1 on the way. I am very blessed. I agree.
So Candace has the most beautiful family. Her Christmas card is absolutely lovely, and I enjoy seeing it every year because your family is so wonderful. It's nice to see so many of them around town and at your event. So I just want to thank you so much for your public service to our community and your community service as a volunteer. You've really been that role model, someone that I've certainly looked up to since I first met you. So we appreciate you, Candace Andersen. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.